Omar, we're about to start. Mm-hmm.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to CAIR's The Daily Dose. I'm Danette Zakari Mass, nonprofit attorney at CAIR, and your host for this evening. I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Wilfredo Ruiz, who is the Director of Communications at CAIR-Florida. This is a night program, and we hope that you'll join us here every night at 8 p.m. We've expanded our programs at CAIR in order to allow for this nightly show to bring you closer to the people and to the stories within our community during this pandemic and trial for our community. Nearly 670,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 reported in the United States, nearly 2 million reported globally, deaths at 143,725 lives as of today. I'd like to introduce my co-host, again, Brother Wilfredo Ruiz, Communications Director, and also a former chaplain. Wilfredo is currently the director at CAIR, California in the Southern region, having previously served as its civil rights legal counsel for over 4 years. He is a board member of the Interfaith Workers Justice in Florida, and he has been a columnist and blogger for multiple newspapers and electronic media outlets. He regularly engages in public university presentations at colleges, universities, theological seminars, and schools, as well as professional, governmental, and civic institutions on a variety of topics, including protection of civil liberties, religion, legal, and foreign policy. He has been interviewed and quoted on hundreds of instances by local, national, and international media outlets on diverse issues on civil rights, politics of the Middle East, the Muslim world, Islam, and Christian-Muslim relations. Ruiz obtained his BA and JD degrees from the University of Puerto Rico and formalized graduate studies in religion at the Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, where he is admitted to the master's degree program in Islam and Christian-Muslim relations. MashaAllah, your resume goes on, Brother Wilfredo served as an officer for the U.S. Navy Judge, Advocate General's Corps, acted as a defense and legal assistant counsel. Wow. We have another Renaissance man on tonight. I don't know how you fit so many things into a relatively short life. Mashallah, how are you doing tonight?
Good. I think so. I'm in South Florida. That's one of the epicenters of the COVID-19 here in the state. But everything is quiet. People are engaging to the level they can, keeping the social distancing that is implemented throughout the state. I believe we're in that plateau of that everybody's hoping to get for things to start progressively getting better. But we're fine, alhamdulillah. Everybody working, engaged, all our 5 regions where we have offices here in CAIR-Florida are fully engaged because we, alhamdulillah, before this, we were already implemented what we call a virtual office environment, where we were working remotely if we wanted to. So what we did is we implemented tools that we already had, alhamdulillah. So everybody engaged in new types of communications, a lot more social media engaging, like this one.
Yes.
Our chapter have other programs on Wednesdays and Sundays as well, and other chapters too. But it's very interesting times because you know what, believe it or not, it's a lot easier to reach interesting people like Dr. Rashad that we're going to be interviewing.
Inshallah. Yeah, and the beat doesn't stop at CAIR. We're always in business. We're always going, mashallah, because of excellent people like yourself And now we'd love to bring on Dr. Rashad if she is in the house. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Kameelah Rashad, founder and president of Muslim Wellness Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting healing and emotional well-being in the American Muslim community through dialogue, education, and training. Through Muslim Wellness Foundation, Dr. Rashad has established the annual Black Muslim Psychology Conference and the deeply rooted Emerging Leaders Fellowship for Black Muslim young adults. Dr. Rashad is the founding co-director of the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition. This coalition was launched by Muslim Wellness Foundation and Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative to address the need for effective planning, preparedness, and organizing in Black Muslim communities during the global pandemic. Dr. Rashid has also served as the Fellow of Spirituality, Wellness, and Social Justice at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the advisor to Penn Sapello, the first Black Muslim student organization at the University of Pennsylvania, and the Muslim Students Organization at the Lawrenceville School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. In this capacity, Dr. Rashad supports students in their exploration of faith-based activism, spirituality, emotional well-being, and healing. She served 3 years as the Muslim chaplain at the University of Pennsylvania and continues to facilitate discussions on religious identity and challenges faced by American Muslim youth. Dr. Rashad graduated from the University of Florida with a BA in psychology. I'm sorry, the University of Pennsylvania. I graduated from the University of Florida. Florida's on my mind tonight. And you served as further graduate education. You got a second master's in restorative practices and youth counseling from the International Institute for Restorative Practices. She completed her doctorate in clinical psychology at Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Rashad, welcome to the Daily Dose. I've been privileged to attend one of your talks before, so I know that our audience is in for a real treat. Thanks for giving us some time in your very busy schedule. How are you doing today?
I'm doing as well as can be expected during a global pandemic, which is why we're here to talk, because that's actually a very interesting question to ask. Even when we're sending emails and we say, you know, I hope this message finds you well, it takes on different meaning now. And so, you know, I'm just delighted to be here.
You're very welcome. It's my first time meeting you, although I knew about your work and in the Muslim Wellness Foundation before personally meeting you like today. It's a pleasure. It's an honor, Dr. Rashad.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine.
We've spoken, we had a little bit of time to talk while you were in the green room about developing a plan for spiritual and emotional health being one of the goals at Black Muslim Foundation, one of your personal goals. Can you talk a little bit more about that in the context of what we're all going through right now?
Yes, so the Muslim Wellness Foundation is a nonprofit organization that I founded back in 2011. And, you know, our focus and our mission has always been to promote healing and well-being in the American Muslim community through education, dialogue, and training. Now, in particular, our focus is on ensuring that the psychosocial sort of mental health implications of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, is something that we also pay attention simultaneously as we urge and recommend that folks stay safe, stay home, that they're also giving some, you know, intentional sort of consideration to how they will also have to take care of themselves as we really struggle with isolation, with distancing, with quarantine, and unfortunately, tragically, as we also deal with illness and death as a result of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brother Wilfredo, I don't want to take up too much space here. What do you want to jump in and ask?
No, I just wanted to say, we hope that by the end of the program, and this for our audience, that we develop with Dr. Rashad some kind of a toolkit, toolkit for you to deal with most common feelings that we all are experiencing, and the whole nation is experiencing during these times of uncertainty, on these times of loss, right? Even though we might not lose anybody in our families, most certainly we will lose somebody that we know. With Dr. Rashad, some kind of a toolkit for you to deal with.
So one of the things that I wanted to first emphasize in the development of sort of a wellness plan is simply acknowledgement. I think that there are many of us, for a variety of reasons, that would like to sort of develop a routine as closely sort of as close to what it may have been before the pandemic. So people talk about really wanting to establish a routine. They may get up in the morning and have breakfast, and everybody's working from home, but they actually want to get dressed. But the first thing that I would encourage folks to do, and this is also a reminder to myself, is to acknowledge exactly what you're feeling in that moment as valid. There's so many ways in which things feel like they're continuing as normal, but the world is kind of upside down right now. So one thing that I want the listeners, the audience members to do is to Google feelings will. It's usually colorful. It takes the center of the wheel, sort of our most common emotions like anger, bad, sad, and then it sort of fans out and gives us expand sort of our emotional language. So we might be feeling bad, but the case is we might actually be feeling pretty much more like despair. We might be feeling hopeless. We might be feeling even very agitated. Unfortunately, we don't always have the ability to use very specific language to describe the emotions that we're feeling. So whether this is a practice that folks engage in the morning, right? Once I get up, what am I feeling? A lot of people have mentioned even having very vivid dreams as a result, or maybe not being able to sleep very well. And so doing sort of that scan of your body, of your mind, of your spirit, and thinking, let me look at this feelings wheel and really identify how I'm feeling. So it begins first with acknowledgement. The other, I would say, is what we might be struggling with in terms of just the grief of the loss of the lives that we knew before, is approaching a level of acceptance, right? So, one thing I mentioned just yesterday was that, May 6th was supposed to be my commencement. I was going to be hooded. This is sort of the capstone of, doctoral training, and that's not going to happen. Right. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that's something that's sad. I'm disappointed. However, I trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there's a lesson, there's some wisdom in what we're all experiencing. But I want to acknowledge what I'm feeling, right? Not to minimize that. And so that's what I would encourage is acknowledgement, but also acceptance that there is some wisdom in what we're all collectively experiencing at the same time.
Well, how powerful. You really can internalize, you really understand what people are going through, especially students right now. I have a senior myself, paying attention to the children and how they're adjusting. Like, what can you tell parents right now about the, disappointments?
Yes. So the same as, so we're as parents, as adults, perhaps we're thinking about how to make this transition from, maybe a commuter life to now, your commute is maybe to the living room or to an office or to a quiet place in the house. But for children and for teenagers, especially, there's no sports activities, extracurricular activities. My sons are 4 years old and 15. And so teenager and toddler, some would say there's some similarities there. but
Yeah,
but
there are.
it's the loss of peers, it's the loss of friendships, it's the loss of sort of daily activities that brought joy, brought them out of the house. And so we need to check in. We may have so many concerns as the adults and wanting to maintain safety and health in so many different areas. But they might be afraid too, and they're watching us, they're noticing when we even become a bit agitated. So for young children, it might look like a regression in some of their behavior. So I saw just in my 4-year-old, he would become very whiny at times and clingy, that he wanted to sort of sit in my lap while I was working. And at first I was like, what is happening? But I had to realize too, that even if he cannot verbalize what he's feeling, there's still sort of the energy and the observation of something is happening and it's totally different than what I knew before. And same with teenagers, right? They may be stuck at home with parents, and we know at this age, peers take on a level of importance and significance, maybe perhaps greater than the family at times. And now they don't have that. So they're being cautioned to stay away.
Can I pause you, because I'm talking to other parents. Actually, I was in a conversation room earlier today, and they are finding social outlets, but now they have more free time. So they have access to social media, TikTok, Instagram, all of this stuff. So looking for that peer access. How you talk about checking in with them. So with teenagers, how can we check in with them in a way that it's not, cheesy? It's not so overt, and also promoting activities that, we want them to do without just telling them to do it. We don't want them to be on TikTok all day. We don't, how do we sort of guide our kids to emotional wellness during this time?
Honestly, I think we have to model that, right? So even talking about how we might miss our friends, right? Or just someone that maybe you had coffee or tea with. Or for me, honestly, one of the biggest adjustments has been just not being able to give people hugs, right? I mean, something relatively simple that we think about as part of our daily lives, we no longer have the option to do. And so it's, as a parent, as a caregiver, being able to say, this is really hard for me too. I think sometimes we default to, well, they're always online, they're always on social media. But I would bet that their social media interactions were always supplemented with face to face, right? So whether they were in school together, sports activities. And so now I think it's the lack of options that's really starting to impact folks' well-being.
Dr. Rashad, how do you recommend our audience to tear that barrier of getting professional mental health care for themselves or their families? There's a lot of stigma in our community. How can we tear down that barrier and people to open up and say, in these times we should be alert and open and willing to get help and get help for our family, right?
Yes. I think it really starts with all of our leaders and sort of respected community members normalizing what we're all experiencing, right? Unlike other events, maybe even worldwide, it would feel like everyone else, like in the global community, is sort of going along as business as usual. This is sort of a moment in history where everyone is impacted sort of by the same event. And what we know from previous pandemics, right? We have sort of the advantage of history. Is what research shows is that the psychological effects of pandemic, right, has far-reaching and widespread consequences long after the threat of infection, right, has ended. It is, mourning, it is grief, it is loss of life and livelihood. And so I think normalizing in every context that we're in. So we need our imams, we need religious advisors, chaplains, to just, again, acknowledge this is difficult, this is exhausting, this fills you with hopelessness at times, and right, that there are ways that we can tap into our own resilience and to skills and strategies in order to meet this challenge. So we have to sort of model what healthy conversation looks like when we're talking about mental health.
And how can chaplains, imams, and mental health professionals meet the challenge of not having in this generation people that will serve as a support because they have lived the experience? For example, I was raised in Puerto Rico. When hurricanes came, it was so comforting to listen from people who have lived the experience, who say, don't worry, I lived this. Your grandma will bring the old hurricanes. Your mom will bring the most recent ones. But in this pandemic, there's not a reference in our generation that we can confide on them and that we can trust them because they have lived it. In absence of that, what tools do counselors have and imams and chaplains?
So one of the projects actually that we've launched within the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition is called the Wisdom of the Elders Project. And that was sort of twofold. One was to begin to really think about the impact of social isolation on our elders, right? So the inability to be close, like in physical proximity at times, to our loved ones, and the unique technological challenges that they may have that may exacerbate that sense of loneliness. And the other is to bridge sort of the historical knowledge that they have. So many of the elders that I've spoken to have said, I've experienced nothing like this in my life, right? This is something new, absolutely. However, we have been through other sort of difficult life experiences. So I think the breadth of what they know and have lived through also gives us an opportunity to think about how are we grounded in how we can be resilient, what we can learn. An elder told me, this is going to be very hard, but I also think it's a time to rejoice. And I just thought, what?
Yeah, what's that?
What does that look like? And he went on to explain that it really opens up this opportunity for us to reimagine community, for us to have these conversations around mental health, for us to be more intentional about how we connect and maybe not take for granted that we'll see someone the next day. So when he sort of spelled it out in that way, I said, okay, I don't think I would have used the word rejoice, but given his 75 plus years, he was able to provide sort of that richness that I, in my age, am lacking because I'm not an elder.
Can we talk for just a second about the disparate impact? So everybody is impacted, obviously. CAIR is a Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. We track the impact on different populations and disparate impact. And we understand that there's a disparate impact on African Americans. There's been a lot in the news recently about a higher rate of death. We had an expert who came in and informed us that in Chicago, the rate of death, over 70% of the cases of death are African American. An incident occurred. Brother Wilfredo, I think, can speak better to it. It was in South Florida. Brother Wilfredo, can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. Probably our audience is aware of this doctor that one of his missions, noble missions, was to test the homeless population here in South Florida. He was an African-American doctor. His last name is Henderson. And 2 days ago, he was handcuffed by the police for violating the curfew, right? And they did not believe him when he said he was a doctor.
Wasn't he loading also? I think he was loading equipment actually in his medical equipment.
And if it wasn't for his wife, who was able to bring at some point his identification, this story would have ended with a doctor probably incarcerated, arrested and incarcerated in the middle of this pandemic while helping to curb the pandemic. This just exemplifies, Dr. Rashad, what we know is this disparity. Another statistic, worrisome statistic, is that how disproportionately for example, in Illinois, the African American population is being impacted by the pandemic. Well, there are only 30 something percent of the population of the state. There is like 2/3 of their population is being directly affected, and that can replicate throughout the nation. That minorities, the African American being affected, added with another minority within our community that are the elders. If we go to the mosque, you know that 2/3 or more of the people attending the Islamic centers are people over 60, 55 and plus. They are worried. They are worried because they know they're more vulnerable than the rest of the population. How can we help them?
So I think to speak to the issue around racial disparities, it's, the primary reason that we co-founded the Black Muslim COVID Coalition is that historically we know that when there has been, the ramifications of, decades and centuries of structural inequality, it will manifest more readily, and quickly during these kind of crises. One of the, I think, implicit assumptions at times is that because of the disparity, that is indicative of some failing on the part of African Americans to sort of heed proper precautions or to practice social distancing, when in fact, the reason that we're seeing the higher rates of infection and death is because that healthcare services, so access to just diagnosis and treatment, are lacking. It means that those who are perhaps engaged in essential or frontline work are disproportionately those who are African American and also Latino, is what we're seeing in New York. And that the high risk factors such as asthma, diabetes, heart disease are preventable diseases that we see in higher proportion in the African American communities because of the histories, again, of disenfranchisement, food deserts, political disenfranchisement. So there's sort of a very clear connection between sort of the failure of systems in this country, which result always in fatalities, right? And so what we really want to highlight is that when it comes to wellness, right? For example, when you're dealing with the inequalities, the higher rates of infection, that you can be immediately profiled. You may have seen on just on online that folks talking about, well, if I wear a mask that isn't clearly, right, a medical mask, will I be profiled? Will I be stopped? Will I be seen as threatening?
It happened here in Maryland. It happened, a brother, he
Sure.
wearing a mask, he went to a store in his own neighborhood.
Yes.
He's gone, and they told him to take it off. And he, of course, he doesn't want to take it off. He refused. He works in the medical industry. He
Right.
understands acutely the danger, and he was tasered,
Yes.
dragged into a back room. I don't know if you saw this, it was in the news yesterday. So, it's a fear. It's also a reality.
Yes. Yes. So when you're thinking about sort of the mental health impact of both the anxiety, sort of this sense of almost existential dread that everyone is feeling, right? Not knowing how and whether they'll be infected or a loved one, combined with just, what they're saying is the ability to even get tested is decreased, right? When you're thinking about these low income or just under resourced communities. And when you are trying your best, right, to be conscientious, you may be stopped. There was someone who was thrown off a SEPTA bus in Philadelphia. So just all of those compounding factors mean that we are really going to be dealing in the midst of the pandemic, right? And then post-pandemic, the trauma of this experience, that also includes the racial violence and the inequities that communities have been challenged by for many centuries.
Mashallah, you have a whole coalition around this.
Yes.
And what's the name of it, so our audience can hear it?
Sure. It's the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition. You can go to blackmuslimcoalition.com, Black Muslim Coalition on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter at BM Coalition. And you can, definitely get more information about, our mission and our goals, which is to highlight the disparities, but also leverage the resilience and the knowledge within the community to address these challenges as well.
And there are many layers in these challenges presented to our community because, as you mentioned, Doctor, we Hispanics and African Americans, and include myself, we are predisposed with these conditions that will exacerbate or help deteriorate our health more if we were to get infected with the virus. But that instead of being an indicator to the government to assign precisely more resources to those communities that will need them disproportionately more than the regular or average communities, we see that not happening in the field, and the results are the higher death rates that perhaps I'm worried they're going to be hidden under the carpet, under the pretext that, they were just predisposed to or more prone to die because they were Hispanics or African Americans.
Right. And so think about sort of what is internalized when that is the implicit and actually explicit message, is that you're expendable, right? You're disposable, right? You're just an unfortunate casualty, because what we saw in Illinois was that there were protests, right? In front of the governor's office, demanding that, things be relaxed, that these, shelter in place orders be rescinded. But when you have bus drivers, grocery store workers, home health aides, again, the professions where we might be overrepresented as people of color, are the ones that are at higher risk of infection. And so when we see the high fatalities, right? And it's tragic, because what we understand is that we might only be 1 or 2 degrees, if that, separated from someone who has
Mm.
passed away. And when you're getting the message from the administration, right, that, well, it's unfortunate, right? Or the Surgeon General, who's saying, well, if you guys will stop using drugs and smoking and drinking alcohol, then maybe you can do your part, right? And so on every level, the message that's being conveyed is that if you are ill, if you die, well, that's just unfortunate. We know that there's going to be casualties, right? Because they're also using this kind of war language.
Mm.
And what happens is that when that also occurs repeatedly and you feel helpless to stop it, that can also trigger a trauma response. And so for people of color, for African Americans that are struggling to cope with this new reality, we have to pay attention to the context, and we have to pay attention to our resources and the support and the connection that we'll need now and into the future, to withstand all of those messages that are being conveyed around just the value of your life.
And let me ask a question. How can those in the American Muslim community who are not African American be good allies right now?
Mhm.
How do we, be there to support mental health and well-being? How do we show that support,
Mhm.
and be effective?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And, I think a simple answer is to really educate oneself about, why is there a National Black Muslim COVID Coalition, right? I'm also a part of the National Muslim COVID-19 Task Force, but we still saw a need
Yeah.
for this particular attention to be paid to the Black and African American community. And so I think even just going to the website, right, blackmuslimcoalition.com, just to get an understanding of
Mhm.
why is there a need for this conversation, and what have I learned as a result of seeking that knowledge about the experiences of the Black Muslim community in the United States. I think that's one simple way to begin to support and to be an ally.
Be educated,
Yeah.
educate ourselves. You provided the information, it's there. There's no reason why everybody shouldn't go as soon as this program is over and read what's on the website. Thank you so much. We're getting a question from one of our viewers. I don't know if you can see it, Brother Alfredo, about motivating teens. If you don't mind, we're a bit past our time, but people want you to stay on. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
Suggestions about motivating teens. How do you get them to stay active, exercise? What as
Yeah.
parents, what do we need to be doing?
Yeah. So one thing that I would recommend is to first ask them, again, the acknowledgement, the affirmation of what they're experiencing. Like I said, I have a 15-year-old, and for many of them, thinking about, like, do they sleep through to the afternoon, right? Uh, but some of that is because it might be his way of trying to process sort of the emotional burden of what's happening. Or kind of staying up late on FaceTime with friends until they're exhausted, right? Because it's so difficult.
PlayStation, or yeah, all these gaming.
Yeah. Well, or no, because it's so difficult to think
Mhm.
about what's happening right now, sort of the enormity of it. I had a young person tell me, I'm so young, but now I'm thinking, like, I could die, right? The mortality is a very real sort of existential question now, right? It's not just theoretical. And so I think having the conversation about, like, what do you miss? Right? Like, what is your hope for after this is over? Whenever over, right, is. And also saying, like, what do you think would be most helpful from me, right, in order to help you cope? Right?
Taking notes, by the way.
Yes.
That's why I'm looking
Yes.
down.
I mean, so I
Appreciate
think, we want to provide sort of information and knowledge, but often I would say where we fail as parents, and I include myself in that,
Mhm.
is that we don't trust that they've also been thinking very deeply about this, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be as curious about their thoughts, their emotions, and their feelings, and then co-create a plan. Right? To say, well, you know what, everything is upside down. So why am I making you get up at 7 in the morning? Right? Like, what is some of that is wanting to hold on to a world and a life that no longer exists.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we ask them, what would be most helpful? What do you need from me? Right? They may say like, just kind of get off my back a little bit.
I was
I guarantee 99% that's what my kids will say if I ask
I
them.
was going to ask you precisely that, with some tools or some tools for the youth at the family unit on how to get their space in this nowhere to run environment.
How about those of us who don't live in 50,000 square foot homes?
Exactly.
Right. Myself
normal folks.
So one of the things that my husband has instituted with my 4-year-old, he takes him on what he calls night hikes. And so it's just a walk around the neighborhood where it's quiet, it's kind of like after Maghrib, it's in the evening. But this is sort of for my 4-year-old, it's an adventure, right? He's like, we're going on a night hike, right? And he's like, this is just the most awesome thing. And for my 15-year-old, it's been going to, there's a large park in the area about 10 minutes away. And he can hike, right? He can run. My son is a soccer player, so he's missing that sort of physical activity. So he's taken it upon himself, right, to develop like a physical health plan. And I take interest as much as I can in that, right? So he's like, Mom, can you do 10 push-ups? I'm like, probably not, but I'll try. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, right, to think about what are they interested in? What are they finding helpful? And how can I include myself in that activity as opposed to creating something I think is best for them.
That is great. Honestly, that I've taken so many notes tonight. I feel like really lucky that I got to sit in this seat tonight as a mother of 3 and listen to this. I hope everybody immediately goes to blackmuslimcoalition.com and reads that first, then goes talk to their kids. Also after that, educate ourselves, and then pass on also the great information that you gave us in general about our families. Brother Wilfredo, is there anything that you'd like to ask of Dr. Rashad before we have to head off?
Just to thank her, and we will include Dr. Rashad. Are you available for personal consultations as well?
Not at the moment. I'm actually a postdoctoral psychology resident at Westchester University. So I'm actually still working with undergraduate students. But there are 2 things that I would recommend that folks can also do. If they're on Twitter, and I'll try to post this, it's at MWF National on Twitter. I posted, there's a link to, it's called the Coronavirus Anxiety Workbook. It is fantastic. It's from the Wellness Society. So if anyone is just looking for it, you can Google the Wellness Society. It's a workbook that I've used, that I've also given to clients, because it takes you through a process, again, of tangible strategies to manage, a lot of the range of emotions that we're experiencing. And the other is, I think, is also great for young children, but for everyone. It's sort of a pandemic time capsule. And so it's asking, children like my 4-year-old, I asked him, I said, what do you know? What is this coronavirus? He said, I can't go outside. Right. So that's his understanding of it. And so it takes you through several exercises that allows us to capture this moment. I mean, this is history, right? And if we're looking back on it retrospectively, it will be through the lens of like, I survived it. Right. But if we're documenting all of the sort of the ups and downs that we're experiencing right now, and then, inshallah, 20, 30, 40 years from now, we share that information, it has a different kind of meaning. So even helping children create time capsules. Right.
Should we answer the hard questions from our kids or youth? The hard questions where we're going to address issues of death, issues of losses, issues of financial difficulties living now and in the future. But because in one of the layers we have not, because of lack of time, gone into is how will this affect the pocket? Not only because you're unemployed now, because all the debts that everybody will incur when we have multiple family members for weeks in ICU units. How do we deal with that? Should we parents feel ourselves equipped and go ahead and answer them, or should we hold the answer until we're fully sure what the good response is going to be? What should we
just put you on the phone with our kids, Dr. Rashad?
So,
do?
so one of, I think that's a great question. And, what I hear in that is kind of our own anxiety as adults, right? There's so much uncertainty for us, right? So the real question is, how do I provide reassurance, right, to the, I call them the tiny humans who are dependent on us when we don't know, right? And so I think even starting with, this is something that, I'm a little afraid about, right? There's so much unknown. So it's again, naming all of the things that is already true for them, right? But if we start the conversation with everything will be fine, right? That'll actually decrease their trust in us because they know for a fact it is not. And so, stating again as a fact, like this is really difficult for everyone. I'm worried about my own parents, perhaps their grandparents. I know this is going to be hard on you, right? Do you start school in the fall? We don't know. And then, having an ongoing conversation, right? Because they're listening to the news. Unfortunately, I'm kind of like a CNN junkie, so I'm always playing it somewhere in the background. And at one point, my 4-year-old said, like, I don't want to hear that. He said, I don't know coronavirus. He said, turn it off, mommy. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I hadn't been paying attention to, sort of my wanting to be plugged in was also impacting him.
Yes.
And so they already hear it, they feel it. And so when we name it, right, we allow them like that sort of relieves their burden. They're like, okay, I'm not making this up. Like
Mm.
mommy's a little scared too, but she seems to be handling it well, right? Or as well as she can. So I can breathe a little deeper.
It's so relatable. You are very relatable, mashallah, Dr. Rashad. Not all doctors have this kind of approachability. So thank you for also, being vulnerable and sharing some of your own experiences. I relate to that, the CNN junkie thing
Yes.
too. And, all of that, whoever viewed this program tonight really did get a treat. I have never taken so many notes.
Oh,
One of these while I'm interviewing, before. So just thank you so much. I think it would be great if you came on later and talked about if you were able to talk about getting ready for Ramadan. We didn't even get to go into all of that. It's 8:42. Wow, we went like 12 minutes over our time. But I mean, there's so many questions that we have about how to prepare our home for Ramadan and talk to our kids about what it's going to be like and talk about Eid and do all that. So if you want to give us any more of your time, that would, be really
my pleasure.
Awesome. And I want to be the note taker.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rashad.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Have
Have a good night with your family, inshallah.
All right, inshallah, you too.
And thank you, Brother Wilfredo, so much for joining me. Thank you. I really enjoy getting to be in the CAIR family with you. I'm so grateful to have such nice colleagues. And I miss that we didn't get to see each other at National Council meeting. Usually the whole CAIR family gets together, a big meeting every year to take care of business, but also to be in each other's company. And so it's great that we have technology so that at least we can meet each other this way. So thank you so much for viewing, everyone. CAIR is able to bring you this programming because of the generous financial support. If you're a donor to CAIR, really, really want to thank you. It's because of that support that we're able to be here, that we're able to provide this programming to give you this expert knowledge. So thank you for what you do. I hope you have a great night, inshallah. Please continue to send us your questions. Don't forget to check out cairnewsroom.com. We have great information on there. We have expert columns, news of the day, blogging. I mean, just everything. It's an information powerhouse. So please go and check out that website. If you like this video, give it a like and come back tomorrow night. We're going to have Tamara Gray, who's a scholar. She's going to be with my friend and colleague, CAIR's chapter manager, Asma Rahman, is going to interview her. I'm really excited to tune into that. So we'll see you soon, inshallah. Have a good night. Assalamu alaikum.